Tuesday. Today is October 20th, and you are joining Demonstrated Success for Educator SEL, Part 2, Social Awareness and Relationship Skills.
Where's the volume?
Can I just ask everyone, remind them to just put themselves on mute till they're ready to talk and participate in the webinar, and then you can unmute yourselves when you want to chat with us. That way you can, I hate to say it, but multitask if you need to. I like to think nobody's doing anything else, but that way we just don't hear anything in the background. Thank you. Today's agenda, I can let you all read, but there are some clear objectives for you that you will see in the next upcoming slides. We want to talk about why SEL for educators is so important and how you can leverage your social awareness and your relationship skills. And we are always open for questions. If you have a question after this, you are welcome to email or reach out to us at any point in time. The end of the webinar does not equal the end of questions for you. A few brief things. We're so happy you're here with us today. We're always happy to see you and correspond in any way. Just for you to all remember, tomorrow, so 24 hours from this webinar, then you get an email from me with a link to the slides, and it has the resources that Lauren will talk to you about today. You'll also get your PD certificate to print out. We really want you to participate. We find the best webinars are the ones when you are actively involved, as you know, from being a teacher yourselves. And also, about 20 minutes before the webinar ends, I'm going to put a survey in the chat box. I'd love for you to take a minute and just fill that out for us. Your feedback matters to us. It will help us decide, what webinars we should increase or do more of or tailor things to. We really appreciate all your feedback. So thank you. I'm Elizabeth Dion. I'm the admin for the group at Demonstrated Success, and with us is Lauren Mercier, a wonderful educator and guidance counselor and just human being.
Thank you, Beth.
So this is the second part in our SEL for Educators series, social awareness and relationship skills. These are some bullets on things that Lauren will be going over today and why it's so important. So we also have on November 18th, the third and final session of our three-part SEL series called Responsible Decision Making. So we hope to see you there as well. And once again, all of these are being recorded. You can always go back to our YouTube page and watch them again. You can share them with your colleagues, whatever you'd like. Saturday night viewing with some popcorn.
Let's be real, Beth.
Yeah.
Come on.
Throwing it out there. Hey, maybe someone wants to. That's okay. I'm not judging.
I see some skinny pop out there. I like that.
All right. And then just other offerings that we have, particularly for the CSI, ATS, and TSI schools. We don't invite anyone but you folks to these webinars. So November 10th, we have high impact literacy assessments. December 8th, we have math interventions. And December 15th, how to build student agency. And then for all New Hampshire schools, we have more PLC webinars. There's a whole 5-part series. The first part was yesterday. You can jump in on any of them. You can watch yesterday's off our YouTube channel, any of that. And don't forget to just check our website periodically for updates. Or read the emails that get sent to you. Those get sent out with updates of the webinars and how to register as well. All right, I think we're ready to roll.
All right. Thank you very much for that introduction, Beth. And thank you very much for joining. Again, feel free to turn your cameras on and ask questions. I'm hopeful that this is interactive. I know the first one was very interactive, and I always love to ask some questions during the presentation and get your feedback. We will have an opportunity for a breakout room in just actually a couple minutes to kind of kick us off here. And so, the more participation, the better off I think you'll feel too, and talking to some colleagues who are working in different schools, and the more you take away. So here's our agenda slide. You'll see this pop up a couple of times. This really just helps keep us on track, keep me on track throughout the presentation. So here are your objectives for this afternoon. So we are going to review the importance of understanding and developing our own social emotional competence as educators. And we'll work toward identifying and leveraging social awareness and relationship skills to make our interactions with students and colleagues more meaningful. So in our first session, we talked a little bit about self-awareness and self-management. And so today we'll introduce others into that realm. So we're talking about working with others, communicating with others, and really having great relationships. So you'll see a couple of bullets here: the asset-based lens, empathy, vulnerability, bias, and behavior is communication. And so these are some of the bullets that we'll talk about in the next hour, and really focus in on those areas. So here is the SEL for educators, a little bit of background and significance. So educator SEL is competencies that adults need in order to manage stress and create safe and supportive classroom environments. We're talking about skills, we're talking about mindsets that we need to effectively embody, teach, and model, and coach our students through SEL. So in the last couple of years, we've seen a push in our schools to incorporate social and emotional learning curriculum into our classrooms, K-12. And, as we as a company were thinking about some professional development opportunities for educators this year, we started talking about, we're pushing SEL for students. We need to talk about SEL for the people who take care of the students, right? It's so very important. So that's sort of how this series came about, and the intent behind it. And just overall your well-being and emotional state, right, in schools. So that really is, in a nutshell, educator SEL. And we'll, like I said, we'll break it apart a little bit and talk more about these couple of areas today. So why SEL for educators? We need to, as educators, build our self-awareness and our development of these skills for sure. And once we build them and we're aware of them, we have to leverage them. So we have to use them. They have to be in the forefront of our mind in our interactions with students and with colleagues and with families, right? So I'll probably toggle between those three. So we'll talk about our relationships with our students. We'll talk about colleagues, right? And then we always want to include families in that dynamic as well. We also know that we need these strong skills to be outstanding role models. So it's, we have to practice what we preach, right? And strong skills are going to help us manage and respond to student behavior much more effectively, improve our relationships, enhance our collegiality, and exhibit, hopefully, a higher level of job satisfaction, reducing your sense of overwhelm and your sense of burnout, that feeling of burnout. We actually are going to, just to kind of give you a heads up, a preview, we're going to really tap into burnout and overwhelm in our final session in November. We're going to talk about boundaries and the cost of caring. So that's all part of this series. But essentially, developing these skills and leveraging them will help you with your job satisfaction. So this is the CASEL wheel. And so CASEL is the collaborative for academic, social, and emotional learning. And just give me a little wave if you've seen this wheel before. I can't see all of you, but I'm going to scroll real quick. Good. Some of you are giving me a good wave, a thumbs up. Thanks for the thumbs up. I love that. Yeah, so this is the wheel. And this is really, CASEL is really a leading organization in research-based research-based social emotional leaders. So they've done a lot of work here, and they've pretty much, I'm going to call them spokes on the wheel, right? And they've pretty much determined that these are the 5 primary areas in which we want our students to develop, and also adults, right? So we want self-awareness skills, right? We need to leverage those. We need to be aware of self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and then responsible decision making. And within that is social emotional learning, right? And we know they're explicit skills. So within each of those spokes are lists of explicit skills that we want students to learn and to use, right? And same thing for educators as well. Good. So we're gonna hop right in, and I know it looks like we're so close to closing in questions, but this is the meat of the presentation here, and so we'll hop right in. And again, you know, as much as you would like to participate, you're welcome to do that, and we'll get started here. So here's the wheel, right? Just introduced you to the wheel. We're in the green zone today, all right? And so these are some high leverage social awareness and relationship skills that we feel are really important for you as educators. So applying an asset-based lens with ourselves, students, and colleagues. So asset-based lens is something that is really important, especially in the world in which we're living, coming back to school. We're in the midst of a pandemic. We have students who are struggling socially, emotionally, academically.
Lauren, I can't.
Can you hear me?
I couldn't hear you. You went out for a minute.
Oh, I did. Okay. Sorry about that. Asset-based lens. So we're looking for the positive. We're going to accentuate the positive, and we're going to move away from that deficit-based thinking. Okay. We're going to touch base a little bit more about asset-based lens in this first activity. Perspective taking. So that is putting ourselves in somebody else's shoes, right? So we're going to take somebody else's perspective. We're going to consider, how does that feel for this person? What might their experience be like? And we're going to kind of keep that in mind as we're in our classrooms and we're considering the students or the staff members who are in front of us and working with us each day. Listening and interacting with empathy. Embracing vulnerability. We will tap into this in just a minute. Cultural awareness and awareness of our unconscious bias. So again, thinking about who's in front of us each day, what's the makeup of our class, and considering our students' backgrounds, maybe cultural backgrounds, their experiences at home with mom and dad or whomever they live with, taking that all into account as we're developing our relationships with them. Same thing with our colleagues, our teammates, right? What are their backgrounds? What are they bringing to the table? Knowing and understanding. Viewing behavior as communication. We know that a high leverage skill for social awareness and relationship skills, when we master these skills, we're going to exhibit strong classroom management, right? Because a lot of that starts with us and how we're feeling, right? And how we're going to respond to behavior. And ultimately, all of these things put together is going to help us create more meaningful relationships and interactions during the day. So here's our first task. We are going to apply our asset-based lens. So again, I want you to think of, I'm actually going to bring you back to the bullets that we just saw, and they're all listed in the chat, but I'll explain in just a second how you can view those. We're going to put you into some breakout rooms, and I would love for you to consider the list that you just saw. And again, you'll have access to it in the chat, of some of those really high leverage skills. And I want you to think about yourself viewing through your asset-based lens, and what is a strength for you in that, in this list. What is some strengths? And I want you to be kind to yourself, right? And I want you to give credit where credit is due. I want you to think about, what you bring to the table. And you can also think about, what you want to practice and enhance in terms of skills. But I definitely want you to think about your assets that you already possess. So in your chat, if you see the chat, to everybody at the beginning of the workshop, I listed all of the bullets. So I'd love for you to have a conversation, and I want you to talk about what your assets are and how you use them during your school day. And we'll do 5 minutes, and then we'll come back here and we'll just kind of do a brief share, and I will pop in and out of the rooms. Okay. Sound good? Beth is going to pop us into breakout rooms. All right, Beth?
Yes, you should be all set now.
All right, so.
And I wanted to remind people, I don't think I said it in the introduction too. You have any questions or anything, feel free to write it in the chat and let us know.
Great. So you're being invited to join the breakout room, and you can join that room now.
Yeah, you'll have 5 minutes.
All right.
Anthony, are you all set? And Cheryl, did you just join or did you not make it into a breakout room?
Sorry, I'm in the midst. Was listening to it, but I'm in the
Oh,
midst.
don't worry about it. Don't be silly. No, I just wanted to make sure I wasn't doing anything. I haven't done a meeting in so long. I just wanted to make sure. You're good. You're good. Thank you for driving and listening. And I hope your daughter had a good day today.
Thanks.
Hi. All right. Thanks, guys. I use that in a very broad, general sense. I can't say that.
Realizing there's only one. So I think it's funny, people make fun of the South for saying y'all, but it is a little more inclusive.
It's totally inclusive and it makes sense.
Yeah.
Like a nice, concise way to, yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. Which is funny because Southerners in general elongate everything they say, right? With the drawl, takes a little longer to come out sometimes, but that one makes sense.
Yep. Living in Texas for 12 years. Yep. And I still say y'all.
I like it. I like it.
Yeah, I always think I should change that than saying you guys.
Okay. I think we're all back.
I think so.
Hope we're all back. I'm cruising through these slides again. All right, folks. I was able to pop into most of the rooms, and so I just want to thank you for your participation. I heard lots of wonderful conversations. So would anybody like to share with the big group something that came up in your group? Maybe you had something in common or anything from the big group?
I think that all three of us that were in that room, it was the perspective of the student from his point of view, looking at things from his point of view, and the fact that how important it is to build relationship. I apologize for the dog. How important it is to build the relationships with the students and the families, because we all agreed it goes a long way in helping the child, knowing that we're all on the same page and the student is in the center of everything.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Yukara. Anybody else have a final thought here?
We kind of talked about how the kids coming in this year, a lot more behaviors, and how we have to view that as that communication of, everything that they're going on. And I think, Lauren, like you said, we're all bringing stuff to this new school year. So we have to kind of look at that.
We do. I know I've been in a few schools this year, some elementary, and some of the students in the K1, 2, I mean, they are really, really struggling. And if you think about it, none of those kids have had normal school experiences, right? I personally have a second grader. He hasn't had a normal school year yet, so, and we're seeing lots of like eloping behaviors and, just non-participatory behaviors or disruptive behaviors in classrooms. And so there's a lot going on, and I don't have to tell you that you're in it every day. And so, yeah, I think perspective taking is key. I know your group talked a lot about that, and just, you're right, viewing behavior as communication. What is somebody trying to relay to me here, and we'll talk in a couple of minutes about behavior, but one of the big pieces of that is trying our best to not personalize what's going on. And sometimes that's really, really hard. And I could probably tell you many stories about that. Right. So you did a wonderful job. And I thank you genuinely for your participation with that breakout room. So back to these high leverage, this is the high leverage list. The bolded ones are the ones we're really going to be pursuing this afternoon and going into a little bit more in depth. And really they all overlap, right? They really do all overlap. So we've talked a little bit about that asset-based lens, and I want you to keep that lens in mind as we're talking about some other things this afternoon. And I also really want you to keep in mind your asset-based lens when it comes to yourself, right? And thinking about all the wonderful things that you do bring to the table and really trying to emphasize those as you do your work. So the first piece here, this interacting with empathy. So this is our first high leverage skill that we're going to talk about. So understanding and sharing feelings of others. You don't necessarily have to have shared an experience, right, to be empathetic. And that's really important. So again, this is circling right back to that perspective taking. I can imagine what something feels like. I can try to tap into that emotion myself in that first session. And if it's okay if you didn't join our first session, it's no big deal. But I might refer to some of the things that we've done. We talked a lot about emotions and identifying emotions, labeling them. And so this is, it's that putting yourself in someone's shoes. I may not have experienced the same thing, but I know what sadness feels like. I know what grief feels like. I know what frustration feels like. I can go there, right? And empathy really is a foundational aspect in our classroom and school culture. And we must create for students, we must teach this, we must teach empathy. And then after we teach it, we must create some really authentic opportunities to practice it, right? And to be empathetic and allow your students to feel for one another. We know that empathy is going to fuel connection, right? And that it really will enhance communication. So if I have connected with someone, I can allow myself to, communicate more freely. I can talk about my hopes, my dreams, my fears, things of that nature, because I can connect, right? I've already connected. And that will enhance the relationship. So I don't know, most of you have probably heard of Brene Brown, but she's a researcher and she talks a lot about, she's a social worker and also a researcher. And she talks a lot, TED Talks, and she does a lot with educators, but she has a piece on empathy. And so I'd like to play that for you. It's really brief. I think it's 3 minutes, but it's a nice clip.
This is the checkers game where grandson.
You never know what commercial you're going to get here.
This is the
There
kitchen.
we go. Can you all see my slide here? We're good. Okay.
So what is empathy and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, I'm down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Okay.
Fantastic.
I like that. And I like Brene. She has some good things to say. So let me get back. I did stop my share because I have to get back to my slide here. All right. So I'm going to ask you what, and I have something to share with you, my own thought, but I'm going to ask you about your perspective here. What's a takeaway for you with that clip? What was a takeaway? You're welcome to just jump right in. You don't have to raise your hand. What did you take away from that?
I really clearly understood the difference between empathy and sympathy. And I think, I'm not sure with the kids, because I have more empathy towards these kids than I have towards adults. I kind of sympathize more with the adults than show them empathy. And especially, I'm sorry to say, but my husband, I feel so bad and so guilty now. I need to empathize more with him and not try to make things better.
Yeah. Okay.
Just listen to him and let him get out his feelings.
There you go. There you go. What about somebody else? What was it? What was a takeaway? What stuck out to you?
For me, takeaway was I often have this feeling that I have to solve the problem. So when they said you don't have to solve the problem, you just have to be there with the person, make that human connection. And I just been like that since I've been young. It's always been like the problem solver.
Sure.
And so it's refreshing to hear you don't have to solve the problem. You just have to connect with the person and let them know that you're there for them. Right. And that was that comic was perfect. I don't know what to say, but I care about you and I'm here for you. And that's all that's needed is that human connection.
Right. And I think sometimes like that problem solving, it's like that sometimes like is a badge of honor, right? People come to me with their problems, right? And they want you to solve them, or you feel like you're compelled to solve them. And I think we do that with students too, right? We want to help, right? We want to solve the problems, but in actuality, like it's saying, right, we actually don't have to solve the problem. And sometimes just even sitting physically close to somebody, right? And just being with that person is sometimes enough. What else? Anybody else?
I had one thought that sometimes the reaction to sympathy could be being annoyed. It could be, it could be a very negative reaction to someone giving you that kind of sympathy, like, oh, well, at least, you've got this other thing going on. And I think that we might want to think about that, because if a student is feeling that way, that you're trying to make things better for them, that's not what they're looking for, and it's not making them feel better. So that was
thank you.
My reaction. Maybe that's just a personal reaction.
I think it's, and that's great. That's great. I love that. I think that's great. I know one thing that stuck out for me was choice, that empathy is a choice. And I've never really viewed it as such before, but I have to choose to be vulnerable, which we'll talk about in a second. Right? I have to choose that. And I have to dig deep in myself to identify something that knows that feeling, right? Or that can go there, right, with that person. And again, I don't have to solve a problem, and I don't have to have had the same experience, but I can tap into that feeling or that emotion. So I thought that was really interesting. So, I'd encourage you to practice this skill at work. I think you probably all could relate to maybe having either a student or a coworker where, it's might be hard. Some of your dynamics might be challenging between you. And so if you can kind of keep this empathy piece in mind, and maybe that's a way to approach, a challenging personality. Keeping that in mind for sure.
Well, and I think the other part is just acknowledging that, it's okay to cry. It's okay to feel the way, to acknowledge their feelings. And it's okay to do that, because I know for me personally, when someone says, well, that's stupid, why you feel that way? That's a stupid reason, or that makes no sense for you to feel that way. But it's like, but it's how I'm feeling right now. And can you just justify that this is how I'm feeling? And again, it's that comfort of like, okay, this is how you're feeling right now. I'm right here. You don't have to understand it. You don't have to accept it, but letting the other person and the child know, okay, you need to cry now. Okay, go right ahead and cry. And when you're done crying, we can talk about it if you want. Just acknowledging that they're feeling something,
Absolutely.
no matter what you may think. And
Right.
that it's okay to feel that way because that's how they're feeling, but how to move forward then from that.
Sure. Yeah. And I think, like 2 words you just used, acknowledge and you know, the acknowledgement and the awareness, I think is really what we're after, right? For ourselves and for others too. Yeah. Thank you. That was wonderful. Thanks to everybody. Moving from empathy into vulnerability feels very natural, feels like a flow because they are connected, right? And so vulnerability is when a person is, you know, willingly taking a risk to reveal how they're feeling, or perhaps, you know, if I'm feeling uncomfortable or insecure about something, it's me taking that risk and sharing that with you. It isn't always comfortable, right? And I feel like the word vulnerability or being vulnerable sort of has a negative connotation to it, because we don't want to be vulnerable. We don't want that, right? We don't want to appear weak in front of others. But it really takes a lot to put yourself out there. And it's actually really a positive thing to show that we're vulnerable, we're not perfect. You know, sometimes we worry that openness and sharing may actually subject us to judgment, right? And actually the speaker did mention that piece of judgment or being criticized. But if we think about it, we ask for students anyway, we ask them to be vulnerable every day. We don't say to them, you know, how are you going to be vulnerable today? Right. But we ask them to trust us, trust me on this. You know, you can do this. This is easy, or you've got this, you know, or we invite them into our space at the beginning of the year and we just assume they're going to love their learning environment and they're going to feel great. And you've done so much work to prep the space. But that's a vulnerable experience for students, right? We ask them to leave their comfort zones and do work that they might not understand. We ask them to sit for tests, right? We ask them to work with people as partners that they might not know very well, or that they might be uncomfortable with for a variety of reasons. So we actually need to model that vulnerability and we need to feel it ourselves. So we can model for students by sharing our likes, our dislikes, things that we worry about, things that we enjoy. Obviously, you keep your professional boundaries, but and I have to say that, right? But I know you know that. But we give a little bit of ourselves, right? We admit when we're wrong. We admit when we make a mistake. And it's okay to tell students that we don't have the answers to things, right? So it's putting us in that space where we don't have to be the teacher and know everything, right? Or the specialist and know everything, or the school counselor that's going to fix everything, right? We might not have the answers, and that's okay. It's okay to remember back when you were your students' ages, right? And what experiences did you have back then? And can you share some of those to help your own students navigate? So, you know, that is sort of like, you know, thinking about vulnerability and empathy and how they are connected. And, you know, how do you think vulnerability enhances relationships? Do you have any thoughts on that? How does it make it better?
Do you think it helps with trust? Like if you're putting your wall down and then the other person is like, wow, okay, this is someone who, you know, I can start to build a relationship because they were so open.
Right. Absolutely. I think it has I think trust is a big piece of it. Yeah. Anybody else?
And I think it allows the relationships to be deeper than just, you know, some students you see, oh, hey, how are you? Good morning. Oh, you had a good weekend or whatever. And this allows you to get to know them a little bit more. And then you to build the trust where they can come to you if they're having problems, or just, you know, feel like school is a safe place for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kayla. Anybody else? I thought about a couple of things that I wanted to put down for you here. And I think that, you know, vulnerability enhances relationships by making space for communication, right? So it makes space to name our hopes, our dreams, our fears, to talk about goals, to talk about feelings that we're feeling at work, like if you're talking to a colleague or to a parent, right, about their student. So it creates some space there. It also embraces authenticity, right? Here's me at my most vulnerable moment, right? And I'm sharing that with you, and I'm sharing some thoughts with you. That's pretty darn authentic, right? I'm not making it up. I'm a little bit vulnerable here in this space. I'm worried about blank, me being completely honest with you, right? It invites the honesty. And it encourages us to view each other as humans, right? Deserving of respect, deserving of empathy, deserving of love. And we have to bring that into our classrooms, right? And we have to bring that onto our teaching teams. And I think it just overall makes us feel, more connected and more positive too. So, this next component here is actually something that we could probably spend a whole day talking about, but we're not going to. And so we actually could talk about a lot of this for a lot more than 1 hour. But this is another skill to leverage, which is being aware of bias. And so I found an image of an iceberg here, and you probably may have seen this before, I'm not sure, but this illustrates bias pretty well. And so we're just going to really touch upon 2 types of bias today as an overview. There are other categories of bias that we could talk about, but we're going to stay with implicit and explicit bias. And so we use the iceberg image here to kind of show that the implicit bias is under the water, right? It's the bottom part of the iceberg. It's the part that we don't necessarily see. So implicit are examples of bias on an unconscious level, right? So we're not consciously thinking things or behaving in a certain way. It's unconscious thought. And it's an unconscious association, belief, or attitude, which may be positive or negative. It doesn't have to be negative, that we make over time. And so part of why we do this is because our brain is so inundated with so much information that we just can't conceivably process it all of the time. So our brain, and we don't know that it's doing this, has this tendency to look for patterns or simplify through like mental shortcuts or associations, right? And so I have a thought and I associate it with something else. And so these implicit biases may be influenced by experiences, although the attitudes might not be like a personal experience. You may have heard about something or read something that has influenced you. So there's cultural conditioning might be at play here, media portrayals, right? Our upbringings, we're all from different spaces and places, right? We have different backgrounds. All of those factors can contribute to implicit associations, right? We're not thinking about them, they just are, right? We just think of it. The explicit piece is the tip of the iceberg. It's the top of the iceberg. It's the part that you actually see. And so that's conscious, right? That's conscious belief, attitudes, deliberate thoughts about a person perhaps, or a group. So we're aware here, right? Some of these biases may be potentially or overtly discriminatory, right? In our actions and our language. But the good piece of this is that because it's conscious, we're conscious about these things, these thoughts and actions in our language can be regulated. We can change these things, right? And so people may be motivated to control their biases if there are some social norms in place which dictate that like a prejudice is not acceptable, right? So we can change our thoughts, we can change our actions. Part of all of this is the awareness piece, right? Which is really why we're bringing it to the table today. Being aware as thoughts come into your head and processing those thoughts, because bias is inherent in all of us, right? And I am not passing any judgment on anybody, right? I have it too. We all do. We all have thoughts. And so it's a natural inclination, for something or against something, or a group, right? And it's often learned, right? So it could be potentially influenced, like we talked a little bit about, the cultural background or media may portray, somebody who has socioeconomic status and their upbringing, their ethnicity, an educational background. These are all different influences, right, for bias. And so we know that attitudes and stereotypes are part of this, right? And so an attitude, is it like a general gut feeling or like an internal attractiveness or adverseness to something, okay? Something that we like or we dislike, right? And then a stereotype is like more of an association between a category, like a trait or a group. So like snakes are venomous, right? We just associate snakes with bad things, but they're not all venomous, right? So it's an association that we make. And so with, when we're thinking about bias, we have to think about our language. And so I was thinking about some examples for you of language, and some of our language does reflect our bias or our hidden belief, right? Or the way we think things should be, or something that we've heard before, right? So like gender, for example, a gender bias, right? You've heard the phrase mankind or manpower, right? It means a little manpower, right? Well, probably more appropriately we would say person power, right? Or humankind. If we're talking about mankind, we're talking about humankind, right? So that's an example of language that we've heard over time. Something that I heard recently, somebody was talking about somebody who was in a wheelchair. So it was, they were confined to a wheelchair, right? Well, the word confined might minimize a person, right? So we could say a person uses a wheelchair, right? Or a wheelchair user. So we're changing our language just a little bit, right? But in an impactful way. Another thing that came up in a school I used to work at, I was talking to somebody about websites, and the term blacklist comes up. Well, that website's on the blacklist, or we can whitelist that. Well, that is language that over time we have an association to that, right? So that could be racially charged. So the allowed list, the not allowed list, right? The approved list, the disapproved list. There's lots of ways. And I think the tech industry, I'm not passing judgment. I know for a fact the tech industry is working hard to get away from that. In fact, I searched that a little bit before doing this presentation, and there were some articles on that. Very interesting. But those are just statements that have kind of come through the last few generations. And it's just important to be aware of that language. So again, we could talk all day about bias, but just again, it's really awareness, right? We're really focusing on awareness. And so to mitigate your bias, which is important, and I'll just touch upon this for a minute, but we want to explore our own history, right? And we don't want to judge it, actually. We're not judging ourselves. We're just aware of our own cultural upbringing, our perhaps religious upbringing, our parents' upbringing, and how what has influenced them has influenced us. We must be aware of these things. We can use some mindfulness strategies like labeling emotions. We talked about this last session. We can also do something called decentering, which is kind of taking a step back from passing thoughts. And instead of assuming that like your thoughts are right or wrong, or they define us, we just embrace our thought, and we think about it, and we examine it, and maybe we replace it, right? So we're not going to judge ourselves and be super harsh on ourselves, but we're going to examine the thoughts that we have. And I actually did this myself last weekend, driving around with a friend. We went out to dinner, and I had a thought, and then I was like, oh, that's a bad thought. And they said, well, wait a minute, it's not bad. It's my thought. And I thought about it for a little bit, and it was interesting. Doing this work is interesting for me anyway, but so I'm not sure that anybody's immune. I just think we have to be aware. And I think that's part of it. And use it for personal growth, right? We're in this business of educators, but we all can be in the role of a learner too. And as humans, we want to grow. So that's really important. And again, going back to getting to know your students, and this is really important because you can tackle some of your own bias and, reframe and retrain your brain by just getting to know some of your students, right? And your colleagues, definitely. Behavior we'll touch upon. I'm going to ask you, we'll do a quick 30-second share if we can. What behaviors do you find most challenging? And of those behaviors, does something come up for you when you experience those behaviors? So like it could be a student behavior, it could be a staff member that you have a tough time with, and something comes up and it brings something up in you. Does anybody have a quick thought?
I'll share. How about no reaction at all? When you're telling someone something and there is no reaction, not even an okay, just no acknowledgement whatsoever.
And what does that bring up for you, Beth?
Well, when it's from my 17-year-old son, it brings out rage. Which I never knew I had until I had children.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Beth. Anybody else have something?
Something that I'm an ELL teacher, so something that I find challenging is sometimes teachers kind of, if they're not sure how to reach a student or anything, sometimes they're like, well, kind of like they're yours, or they're your problem, kind of. And I think the feelings that come up, partly like disappointment, because there really are students and we should all be working together. And I know they're in the mainstream classroom for a large part of their day, but also like frustration and okay, like we have to work together to help the student succeed. And then also like kind of, I don't know, mad or upset on the student's behalf as well.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. I've had a recent
I resonate with what Kayla is saying, because that's the same with special education. Oh, if he, like, for example, a 5th grade student says, even though the IEP said and her testing said that reading is not an issue, math is an issue, but she's still not comprehending. She's reading at a level Q. Can you take her? No, I don't. She's part of your class. And it clearly says if that's the issue, then what are you doing in the classroom to help her with the comprehension? And so it's not always my problem if the kid is not performing at grade level. So I kind of became nasty and I said, okay, let's look at the BAS for your whole class. Out of your whole 15 or 20 students, you have 3 who's on grade. What are you doing with the rest of the kids who are not at that level? You're not putting them off onto somebody else. So why can't she be part of whatever you're doing with those kids? She can be part of that.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Yeah.
Shared whining as well, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that is definitely something that's frustrating. No response, phones out. And that's not even just for kids, right? If you're in a faculty meeting, and maybe it's been me, I'm not going to lie, right? I have occasionally glanced down at my phone during a meeting, right? Why do I do that? Am I not engaged? So, it's that type of behavior, right? Am I escaping from something? I don't know, so that's a behavior that's, it's as a teacher, when kids take their phones out, or they don't talk, they don't answer your questions, those are all things that come up for you. Yeah. And so, thinking about us as teachers influencing behavior rather than trying to manage it and control it, right? And we can influence it when we're feeling competent in our own skills, right? And we can model behavior and we can live it, right? We can live kindly and with love in our classroom. Observe it. We want to pay attention. What is the student trying to tell us? Is there a lagging skill here or an unmet need? Most likely, right? Most likely. Thinking about antecedents and consequences is really important. So an antecedent is an action or an event or a circumstance that's a trigger, right? It's what happened first, and then the behavior happens, and then the consequence happens. And it doesn't have to be negative, actually. Consequence doesn't have to be negative. It's like an outcome. What's the outcome? It can be positive or it can be negative. So we want to, it's like that ABC to behavior, right? You may have heard of that before. So antecedent, behavior, consequence. And so we want to kind of consider those, all of those factors, and knowing the function. And so actually, the function that I'm going to talk about today to understand that is the acronym EATS. And, we want to learn the function. We want to understand the function. So it's 4:29 and I am aware of that. I'm going to probably talk for 3 more minutes. So if you can hang on with me, that would be lovely. Sometimes I wish we could just do a little bit longer just because there's so much to say. And your participation has been so wonderful. So everybody eats, we all do, right? And so these are 4 functions of behavior. And so escape is the first function. And this is, some students and adults, right? I just told you about my escaping behavior on my cell phone in a meeting, right? Use this behavior to avoid a task or a demand or a situation or even a person that they might find difficult, right? This could be the student who says inappropriate things in order to be asked to actually leave the classroom because they might not want to do work, right? So they might actually say I'd rather get in trouble than do this work than read, perhaps, because reading's hard, or I struggle with reading at this level. And so that escaping behavior, we are seeing that, and I mentioned that at the beginning of this presentation, the escaping behavior we've seen from some of our littles this year in some of our schools. They seem to be struggling with that piece of behavior. The attention-seeking behavior, we've all seen it. Holy moly. Some students behave in ways that are designed to gain attention, right? Students who blurt out in class may be looking for you to respond to their question immediately, right? They may feel unsure, actually, about when or whether you're going to get to it otherwise. So they may blurt out constantly up. They're up on their seat. They've got one leg tucked behind their bottom and they're up. They're leaning over. They're going to fall over. They're trying to get you. It could be the person tapping away, trying to get your attention, even though you've asked politely, please stop. You've ignored, right? Tangible gains. That's another way here. Some students may have this behavior aimed at getting what they want and when they want it, right? This is the type of behavior that's common for students who are struggling with impulsivity or have trouble with that flexible thinking, right? And then finally, the sensory piece. So the brains are constantly taking in information, right, from their senses. So for some, and for adults too, processing that stream of input is hard, right? And so sensory seekers are going to underreact to sensory input or need more of it to function. They need more of that sensory. And then some sensory avoiders actually might overreact, right? And so in those 2 circumstances, we may see some behaviors. We might see overwhelm, we may see hyperactivity, and they may be disruptive, right? And they may interfere with our learning. So these are some, important things. We're going to toggle back to this in that next workshop when we're going to talk about behavior again and really tapping into our response a little bit more and into this behavior. And so really this pig here is my last slide. And so this is a piggy bank, right? A traditional piggy bank. And so in every relationship, we have an invisible piggy bank, right? I want you to think about you have hundreds of piggy banks all over the place, right? So you have an invisible piggy bank, and just like a real bank, we have to make deposits into our piggy bank, into our relationship bank, in order to withdraw from it. You can't take it if it's not there, right? So when we focus on finding and accentuating the positive, right, we are going to put on our asset-based lens, and we're going to find the good, right? All of the strengths. We're going to choose empathy, and we can consider other people's perspectives, right? When we allow ourselves to become vulnerable with people, and explore our preconceptions and our biases. And if we're willing to really examine those things, and we're willing to replace notions that we have with new ones, right? And when we're willing to understand behavior and view it as a way of communication and consider what someone may be telling us, we're making deposits. Every time we do those things, we're making deposits in the bank, right? And so each time we're adding to our bank, and we're creating authentic and genuine, respectful relationships, right? And so a full bank is going to make it so much easier to withdraw from. So when you have that full bank with a colleague, you can make a complaint to that colleague. You can voice a frustration with that colleague. I didn't like it when you talked over me at the meeting, right? You can do that. When you have a full bank with a parent, you can talk about some things that are not going well with that student, right? The student's really struggling, or I had a hard time with a student today, but I've got a full bank, so I know that this conversation is going to be okay and it's going to have a good outcome, right? Same thing with your kiddos. When we're asking them to do things during the day, right? Those tasks, we ask them to be vulnerable, we fill the bank, right? So I want you to think about ways you can fill the bank, right? And then hopefully next time, maybe we see each other next month, you'll be able to give me some updates on how you're filling the bank up. But really, that's it. We talked about a lot, right? A lot of important things to be aware of. I really appreciate your participation, and I am going to hang on for a few more minutes. But before you go, I know a couple people had to go, and I do respect your time. I won't ask you to do a final share, but I will hang around if you want to talk for a few more minutes. Beth has put the survey link, SurveyMonkey. We love feedback. I'd love to get your feedback. That is in the chat, as well as access to our Google Drive. So there's really no supplemental handouts to this presentation today. Sometimes there are, and sometimes there aren't. So there is a copy of the presentation, and then there's a copy of your PD certificate. So you can get
actually, those copies aren't coming until the email tomorrow.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. This is just the survey. So
you just have the survey.
Okay. And then I will send you a note with the resource link and the PD certificate tomorrow, and hopefully a copy of this as well.
Perfect. So if you're going to hop off, I'm going to thank you very much to all of you for joining. If you have a couple questions or want to chat, happy to stay on, and we'll see you next month. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank
Take
you
care.
all. Thank you, Lauren. You're
Thanks.
terrific as always.
Lauren, some of the thought work that you were talking about sounds really similar to Brooke Castillo's self-coaching model, like a thought model.
Yeah. I haven't done a lot of work with that, but I do know that name.
Yeah, she's a self-coach. She's a coach, and she helps people. And her thought model sounds really, really close to what you guys are talking about, where your thought and then your action, and then how that whole piece of that.
Awesome.
And I know that she has a lot of like good writing pieces to help people work through those thought models.
Okay. I'll definitely check that out.
Yeah.
I'd love to actually like get in schools and do some of this live. I mean, I love the webinar, but I'd love to, get in person too. But that would be great. Where do you work?
I'm in Jaffrey, New Hampshire.
In Jaffrey. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
But I've dabbled a little bit in her ideology, and it sounds like this is sprinkled with that, like that self-coaching model that people are sort of going towards these days.
Yeah, no, I think it's really important. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I'll do
you.
a little bit more digging on that. And thanks for participating today. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Take care. Hi, Carmen.
Lauren, how can I I didn't make it to last month's session. How can I get to see that since they're being recorded?
Yeah, so we have these on our YouTube channel. Beth, are you still on with me?
I am. Carmen, you know what? Why don't I send you the link? But if you go onto YouTube, demonstrated success, you'll see it.
Okay.
Listed. I'm writing your name down.
Okay.
And I will send you a separate email with the link.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Directly, but just so you know, in general, if you ever want to see other things that we've done, they're all out there.
Okay.
You can also go right to our website, and under school improvements, it has these webinars listed, and when they're in blue, they're hyperlinked. So you can just click on the title from last month, and that will bring you directly to that spot on the YouTube page.
Okay.
All right, this one won't be up for 1 to 2 days, depending on when they edit and post it.
Okay.
Okay.
Great. Thank you
But I
so
wrote
much.
it down. Thanks, Carmen. Thanks for
Thanks,
participating.
Carmen. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you. See you next month.
Sounds
Thank
great. Look forward to
Bye-bye.
it. Margaret, are you there? Nope. Nope. I'm gonna just remove her real quick.
I'm here, actually.
Oh, hi, Margaret.
I've had people coming in and out of my room, so I've been off and on, and I'm trying to figure out where the stuff is, you know, we've had a crazy day here at school.
Oh, I'm sure. I know.
Yeah.
So the folder with the webinar will come to you, with the copy of the PowerPoint will come to you tomorrow, as well as your PD certificate. But there is a Survey Monkey link if you wanted to fill that out.
I was just clicking on that when I heard you mention my name. I'm there. Oh, I better stop and go do that.
I said, I don't know if I should remove her, or if you had a question.
No, well, I do actually have a question. I didn't do part 1.
Okay.
So is there a way I can get to that on the?
Yeah. So actually, Beth was just chatting with Carmen about that. So Beth, can you grab Margaret's name down too?
I'm sorry, Margaret, can you repeat what you need? My daughter had to come in she's headed out, and I had to.
That's quite all right. Stuff happens, believe me. Margaret Adams, I need the part 1, because I found this after part 1 was over.
Sure, I will send that to you tonight, and to Carmen as well.
Okay, thank you so
but
much.
You know what? I just wanted to tell you the same thing I told her. And if you go to demonstratedsuccess.com, the drop-down menu under workshops and webinars, it says school improvement. Click on that, and it has all of our school improvement webinars we've done. And when they're blue, they're hyperlinked. So if you click on it, the title that you want to see, it will bring you directly to that video on our YouTube page.
So it's
you can find some that we did last year, any of the titles that interest you, you can see there. And then once you watch it, send me a note, and I'll send you the resource folder or the certificate in it, so you can turn that in as well.
That's great. Thank you. And it's called demonstrated.com.
Demonstratedsuccess.com.
Okay.
And that's always in the bottom of our emails. And when you register, you'll see that. We also have a YouTube page. That's where they ultimately all live. And that's where you are going to see
whether you
get there from our webpage or not.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Margaret.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate seeing
for
you.
joining. Take care.
Bye. You too.
Bye, Margaret.